Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start tonight's proceedings. So to begin tonight, I'm going to call our Wales Policy Chair, Janet Jones, to make the welcome address. So if you'd be kind enough to take your seats, we will begin. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for taking the time to join us for what is a very special evening for the FSB Wales. This evening we are launching our new manifesto, a document which is the culmination of several years' work. I hope the ideas within it will find favour with those of you who have joined us here tonight, but before our policy manager, Dr. Rachel Bowen, outlines the contents of the manifesto, I would like to thank a few people who have made tonight possible. First of all, I'd like to thank the Deputy Presiding Officer, David Melding, AM, who has kindly sponsored tonight's event at this famous venue. Thank you, David. Thank you. Absolutely wonderful. I would also like to thank the 5 leading politicians who have kindly agreed to take part in our panel discussion. And it would be remiss of me not to thank all of the academics and researchers whose work has played such an important part in the creation of this manifesto. Finally, I would like to thank all the members of the FSB Wales Policy Unit, people who have given up their time away from their own businesses to oversee the development of this work over such a long period. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Rachel to give a brief insight into our manifesto, A Better Way for Wales.
Thank you, Janet. I'm not going to talk for too long or go into too much detail, as I hope you've all got a copy of our manifesto. As Janet said, a lot of work has gone into this document over the past few years. And at the risk of turning this into a terrible speech in an Oscar ceremony, there are a few people I would like to thank, some of whom I know are in the room tonight. And these include Calvin Jones, David Picknell, Nick Clifton, Stuart Cole, Andy Crawley, Carol Williams, Lucy Brill, Josh Miles and Iestyn Davis. The last 2 were a core part of the FSB Wales team when we were developing the manifesto. Many of you will have seen the report that FSB Wales commissioned from CRESC. CRESC is the Centre for Research on Socio-Cultural Change. And you might have seen the report that was issued last Wednesday from Carol Williams, Lucy Brill and the team at CRESC, entitled What Wales Could Be. We wanted to start a debate, and I think it's fair to say that the report has certainly done that, particularly amongst some in the academic community. The independent CRESC report helped to inform some of the thinking of our manifesto, and you can see this reflected in the scene setting of the first few pages of our manifesto document. We wanted our manifesto to be focused, rather than just another long list of things that we'd like to see from a future Welsh Government. And it's for this reason that we chose to focus on 5 main areas. The first is better local economies, with an emphasis on getting local economies working better across the whole of Wales. And this work was informed by Professor Calvin Jones. We know the importance of local councils in economic development, and we've seen some creative solutions in recent years. These include things like the Gwynedd Loan Fund. And one of our key ideas, outlined in the manifesto, is to give a statutory duty for local economic development and regeneration to local authorities. And we know that they can't do this without the resources, which is why we want to see the relevant staff and budgets relocated from the civil service to local authorities to enable them to get on with the job of local economic development. Moving on to our second manifesto topic, a better deal for SMEs. We worked with David Picknell from the University of South Wales and Nick Clifton and David Brooksbank from Cardiff Metropolitan University. And they undertook a project for us to see how the Small Business Administration, which has operated successfully in America for a number of years, could be applied specifically to Wales. And on the basis of this research, we want to see a Wales Small Business Administration overseeing a variety of functions to support our SME community. bringing together things like access to finance, whether that's through a Development Bank for Wales or a different format, bringing together business support and an advocacy role for SMEs. But importantly, also an SME research centre to develop a knowledge and statistics base to inform future policy development. Turning to the third area of our manifesto, better taxation. Well, it's no surprise that FSB Wales members are concerned about issues of taxation. Business rates have a disproportionate effect and impact on small businesses who have premises. And our manifesto proposes some changes to make short-term improvements to the system ahead of a full investigation of alternative systems to better manage this tax and make it fairer in the future. Fourthly, our manifesto looks at better regulation, and our work on this issue was researched by Josh Miles when he was part of FSB Wales. Thank you, Josh, I know he's in the room somewhere. Regulation, it must be said, is not always a particularly sexy or attractive issue. Sorry, Josh. But it is absolutely vital to creating the right environment for businesses to succeed. And it's important to note here that we're not talking about deregulation. We're instead focusing on improving the processes for developing and delivering regulation to make it better, not only for small businesses, but also for regulators. And this work can be delivered for a very reasonable cost, we believe, but it would make a huge difference to all those impacted by regulation in Wales. So turning to the last then of the 5 areas of our manifesto, better transport. Our recommendations here come out of a major report on transport which Professor Stuart Cole has been working on for FSB Wales. We currently have a disjointed approach to transport in Wales, and the next Welsh Government has a real opportunity to make improvements here, to make things better for business and the public more widely. So you might have seen on the news today that one of the things we're calling for is Transport for Wales, the creation of Transport for Wales, which will work in a similar way to Transport for London, to oversee transport policy and provision in Wales. And as an aside, I was contacted out of the blue this morning by the Chief Advisor to Transport for London, who'd seen our manifesto, who'd seen our recommendations, and was actually really keen to get involved and help us in any way he could. It turns out he's actually from Rhun, so he's got a personal connection to Wales, and he'd like to see us make a success and bring that organisation into being. The other thing that we would like to see in terms of transport is for the next Welsh Government to develop a proper methodology for ranking transport schemes in relation to investment. And this means taking a holistic view so that we don't consider the impact of things like the metro or new train lines in isolation from road improvements or bus improvements and more frequent bus services. We need to take a more joined-up view of transport. Some of these policies might sound radical, but we're confident that they're affordable. We asked David Pickernell from the University of South Wales to take a close look at existing Welsh Government budgets and where these could be reworked. And our proposals actually involve rejigging less than 10% of the current Welsh Government economy, science and transport budget. So I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Rhodri Evans, who's Senior Communications Advisor, to introduce tonight's panel and the rest of the evening. Thank you, Rhodri.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel. Well, it now falls to me to welcome our discussion panel. So, croeso cynnes I chi gyd, a diolch yn cymed ran heno. Our first panellist is Rhun ap Iorwerth. And Rhun ap Iorwerth is the Assembly member for Ynys Môn, and he represents Plaid Cymru in the Assembly as its Shadow Minister for the Economy and Enterprise. So thank you for joining us, Rhun. Second on our panel is Mark Isherwood AM. Mark represents North Wales in the Assembly. He is the Welsh Conservatives Shadow Minister for Communities and Housing, and we're very grateful to Mark because he has stepped in at quite short notice to be on our panel tonight. So thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. Thirdly, we're joined by Eluned Parrott AM. Eluned is the Liberal Democrat AM for South Wales Central, and she is her party's Shadow Minister for Business, Enterprise, Transport and Europe. So thank you for joining us, Eluned. And fourth on our panel is a figure who's not in the Assembly, perhaps the only one, Mark Reckle. For those who are not familiar with Mark, Mark is UKIP's Director of Policy and Development, and he's also his party's economic spokesman. So thank you, Mark, for joining us as well. And finally, but by no means last on our panel, is Ken Skates AM. Ken is the Labour Assembly member for Clwyd South, and he's currently the Welsh Government's Deputy Minister for Culture, Sport and Tourism. So as you see, I think we've got a very good panel here tonight, so should we welcome them in the usual way? So just to give you an indication of the format for tonight, so shortly I'll be asking each of our panellists to give a brief response to the contents of our manifesto, the contents that Rachel has just so ably laid out for you. After they've done so, there's plenty of people in the audience tonight who would like to ask questions, I know, so we'll be taking some questions from the audience. The only thing I would ask, if you do have a question, please ask it in general terms so we can put it to each member of the panel. We would welcome questions in either the medium of English or Welsh, and if you require translation, please use the headsets that we've provided for that purpose tonight. So it was with that sort of in mind, I think I'll turn to our first panellist, if I may, Rhun ap Iorwerth, and ask him if he'd be kind enough to give us some opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thanks for the welcome here this evening, and thanks to the FSB and your team, your large team, from the thanks that we heard there for preparing this manifesto. I've always worked closely with the FSB since becoming a Shadow Economy Minister, and I'm a strong believer that in Wales we need to work collaboratively when it comes to formulating policy. We haven't got a wide range of economic think tanks, so I think whether it's the IWA or the Bevan Foundation or political parties or FSB, CBI, I think we need to be in a position where we share ideas when we look for ways of taking Wales and the Welsh economy forward. And for this, speaking as a shadow economy minister from the backbenches, the title of the manifesto says it all in terms of what we're looking to achieve, which is a better way for Wales. And the same is true with this report that I'm very grateful to the FSB for commissioning, what Wales could be. And we need to set the bar higher, we need to be more ambitious, and here we have an evidential base that will help us to hopefully work towards achieving our common aims. I haven't been through it in detail as yet. I know our economy team has, but I know in there we have what will no doubt be a crucial addition to our source of evidence as we put together policy. The manifesto itself will have an opportunity to go through some of those 5 areas of focus in more depth this evening, but firstly, can I say how much I welcome the fact that you have put that kind of focus in this manifesto. I have no doubt that government ministers, who I try to hold to account, do their best to try to take the economy forward, but sometimes governments, well-meaning governments, can try to do too much, and I think there's a lot to be said for actually focusing our efforts on a number of key areas. I'll mention localism. I had a question to the First Minister this week on this very issue, that I'm a strong believer in focusing on creating a series of economically vibrant hubs throughout Wales, and I think the focus that you have in this manifesto hits on that. For example, I'm a big fan of the South East Wales Metro, but we cannot allow that to be a vehicle for just sucking the life out of the South Wales valleys. We've got to think about creating those areas of economic vibrancy in the South Wales valleys too. Business rates, obviously we've talked a lot about business rates. It's one of the raft of devolution of responsibilities that are coming down to the Assembly, and businesses will quite rightly look to Assembly members to show the lead that we, through what we do with these new powers on business rates, really genuinely want to create the right environment for businesses to thrive. And infrastructure, another area we've got to get right. I think the FSB's bang on the money, for example, with the need for a new Transport for Wales Strategic Transport Authority. So I'm confident the FSB will actually see a lot of what's in here in Plaid's manifesto going into next year's election, and I'm grateful for this valuable contribution, as I say, to the debate on Wales's future economy.
Thank you very much, Rhun. If I can move on to Mark Isherwood now to give your opening remarks.
Well, not so bad. Good evening, and I'll say thanks for inviting me out at such short notice. But I'm very pleased to be here, though it's technically outside the brief I normally cover. I think the statistics we discussed yesterday, that 99% of businesses in Wales are small and medium enterprises, representing 218,000 businesses and over 50% of all the jobs in Wales, emphasises the critical role that this sector does and must play into the future, and we want to balance the emphasis on attracting foreign mobile firms with far greater focus on supporting smaller indigenous businesses. My background before I came here was 22 years in business. Do I use the second B word, banking? I am, unlike the idiots who wrecked our banking system, for profit and mutual, I am actually a qualified banker, and I did see it coming, and I said so in the chamber, I think beforehand. But my role involved managing teams of people. You've been responsible for a bottom line in the mutual sector. Being part of a local business community in many different ways, both competing but also mutually supporting. I chaired the local business luncheon club, chaired the local roundtable, and various other activities. So there's much in here which does chime with our policy development. Obviously manifestos aren't completed, certainly not considered in depth, but there's much here which is very much in line with where we're going. The idea of giving specific statutory responsibility to proposed larger local authorities, if that's what happens, or regional collaborations, if that's what results instead. Local development partnerships, I look at the North Wales model, I'm pleased to see that here from North Wales FSB, who's very active up there, and I bump into all over the place. We had the North Wales Economic Forum, lost its funding, but North Wales then came together, local government, transport bodies, and the private sector, and created the Economic Ambition Board, which has been very influential in driving forward the agenda on issues such as transport links, rail electrification, and broader economic need and development. Business rates, our scheme wouldn't go quite as far as you're calling for in here, but it would still ensure that 73% of businesses in Wales were not paying business rates. So I'm interested in the proposal for a small business administration. I understand this is modelled on the scheme in the United States of America. I'm particularly interested in the fact it's arm's length from government, which must be critical if we're going to have real partnership and design as well as delivery of policies at a devolved level. In terms of valuation, more frequent revaluations are critical. I went shopping last Saturday in my local town, Mould, and it seemed that virtually every shopkeeper lobbied me as I went round buying things over business rates in their town, and obviously it's an issue replicates widely. Regulation key. Concerned to hear that the UK government's Best Regulation Delivery Office currently has nobody in Welsh government specifically working for Wales on that agenda. So we do need a clear statement of intent on regulatory policy and a better regulation agenda for Wales. Looking at the transport proposals, arm's length transport for Wales body, similar to transport for London. Again, that has an attraction. It's certainly something we're going to be considering as we take forward our draft manifesto. And again, looking at joint transport authorities at local, regional level. Methodology for ranking transport schemes. Yes, regionally, I know how much concern there is in North Wales. It appears that much of the funding announced down here doesn't seem to go in our direction or the direction of Mid Wales. So I'll stop at that point. But yes, thank you very much for this. We're in tune with much of it and happy to discuss all of it with you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, I'll pass to Eluned Parrott from the Liberal Democrats to give her initial view of it.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and can I just say my own thanks to the FSB team, not only for the manifesto that we see before us, but for year in, year out providing us with a high quality of information, of evidence to bring forward into our policy discussions in the National Assembly for Wales, and evidence which is based specifically on the needs of small businesses in Wales, not just crudely disaggregated from the UK picture. It really is appreciated, and I thank you very much for that. Rather than try and give a forensic analysis of each area of policy, I think perhaps I'd like to focus on two areas which have really chimed with me. And firstly, I wanted to talk about our needs for transport. The idea of setting up a transport for Wales, I think, is an interesting one. Of course, the Welsh Government have set up a transport company, but it's unclear at this point what exactly its role will be. And the Enterprise and Business Committee did go to Transport for London to talk to them about what it might look like as a model, and intriguingly, the Welsh Government hadn't done so at the point in time where they actually established this transport company, which I think is a concern for me. But particularly, I think we have to recognise that we need to have better regional structures for delivering transport in Wales, because Wales is not one single homogenous mass, and nor is it 22 little silos either. Transport is not served well in silos. It serves itself best when it looks at communities naturally and thinks about how we can move people from one place to another, people and goods, I should say. I'd quite like to look at the idea of passenger transport authorities that take in, my starting point would be perhaps three, one working across the urban belt to the south of Wales, taking in Swansea, of course, as well as the metro area. One, looking at the urban North Wales belt and how we can use transport to help encourage investment across the entire of the North Wales corridor and not just concentrated around Deeside. And the third one, which I think is really important, is how we can use a transport authority in mid-Wales to reconnect our market towns with their hinterlands, with the villages, to make sure that we're breathing new life into those communities and enabling our market towns to be what they have been for centuries, the hub of the local regional communities. So I think that is a very interesting thing that you have brought forward in this manifesto. The second thing I wanted to reflect on was the opportunity of a small business administration, which is a policy idea that I'm very, very supportive of. And I think I'd quite like to see something along these lines developed as part of a Welsh Development Bank. And I imagine that a Welsh Development Bank, there is cross-party support for such a thing, but not a cross-party consensus on what it actually is and what it will actually do. And we need to be thinking about fleshing out those bones. I can see potential for a Welsh Development Bank to have three equally important pillars. One, looking at inward investment and trying to encourage businesses to come and stay here, because of course small businesses do need that to provide supply and distribution chains, of course. But we also need to think about using the investment bank as, the Welsh Development Bank as an investment bank and lever in funding for major projects. But that third arm has to be the Small Business Administration, bringing together finance and good quality advice for small businesses to make sure that when they are looking to expand, they've got the support they need. When a business looks to expand, it isn't just about money. It's about taking on new responsibilities, taking on new people, facing new challenges, looking for new markets. And that's why it's critical that we're not just giving money, but we're making sure that those investments have the best possible chance for a success by making sure that the advice that goes alongside it is thoroughly thought out and is supportive in the long term. So can I just say thank you so much for this manifesto. I look forward to discussing it with you over the next 6-7 months, and you will see many of these ideas reflected in our own manifesto when it is brought forward.
Okay, thank you, Eluned. I'm going to pass you on to Mark Reckle from UKIP to give his initial response to our manifesto.
Thank you also to the FSB. You've been very generous with your time. I think this is probably the fourth meeting I've had with you over the last few months, so thank you. You're also, I think, very, very generous actually in co-funding this report, What Wales Could Be by Cresk. I found very, very stimulating, and I think the fact you paid for half of it, I believe, shows how much desire there is for new thinking in terms of policy work within Wales. I don't agree with quite a number of the things in the report, but I think in one key area, I think it is persuasive, and that is that rather than focusing solely on trying to bring in mobile investment and competing with many, many other regions, perhaps beyond Europe and beyond, to try and get sort of mobile inward investment, particularly giving Sony, Panasonic, sort of LG, and some of the experiences that we've had, to shift the focus at least somewhat to grounded businesses as to how you get those to invest and develop more, I think is a very, very promising avenue for work. In terms of the FSB manifesto, the 5 main themes, the statutory duty for promoting economic development and regeneration for local councils, that's something that I would strongly support. UKIP doesn't believe that devolution should end at Cardiff Bay or Cate's Park. It in many areas, go further down to local councils and local communities. And I think particularly for economic development, given the huge diversity of economic circumstances across different regions in Wales, I think there's a very strong argument for devolving both those powers, but also staff and money to support exercise of those powers. That's something we would support. The Small Business Administration, I think, is also a good idea. I think it will particularly shake up existing provision and make the providers think much, much more carefully about the client base of small businesses that they're trying to serve. And I think that one-stop shop model is right. On the taxation and the business rates, I mean, I've read your pitch. It's a large sum of money, and I think it's the area where perhaps I'd want to look most closely in terms of how you're saying that's funded. And it's an area I'd like to do some more work with my party before we give a detailed response on that. Better regulation, I think it's particularly important that when the Assembly is legislating in areas that genuinely affect business and actually involve quite a lot of work for that regulation. I think the example you gave me was the food standards, and if a business gets inspected and for whatever reason gets a disappointing result, the whole idea of those food standards is to try and drive up standards. So rather than making that business wait 6 months to have another chance to get inspected, let's bring that forward 3 months sort of maximum, actually give them that incentive to improve, because that's what the regulation's meant to be doing, so let's make that work. In the final area you have transport. I entirely understand your frustration with transport and how it's being provided and assessed within Wales. But after 16 years of a Labour-led government here, I'm not convinced that the answer is necessarily, well, let's just abandon the political process and hand it over to experts and just trust them to get on with it. I think particularly in the M4 Relief Road, what we saw with Jenny Rathbone yesterday, and I'm delighted to meet Professor Stuart Cole this evening. I think as one man has actually probably driven this debate as much as the whole Assembly and the Welsh Government and the tens of millions spent by consultants already. And I think in that area what we really need is fresh thinking in the Assembly, and we need change in the Government of Wales to get a better policy on transport.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And finally, I'll pass over to Ken Skates again.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Noswaith dda pawb, it's great to be with you this evening. And can I thank, first of all, so many of you for joining us. Today's results or figures on the economy, I think, are further proof that the Welsh economy is going from strength to strength. We have record employment figures. We have GVA growing at a faster rate here than across the UK as a whole. Long-term youth employment is falling faster here than across the UK as a whole. And we have record performance in a number of sectors, including the creative industries, which is growing faster here in Wales than anywhere in the UK apart from London, which you would expect. But it's helping to grow thousands and thousands of new small companies. I think that economic growth is best delivered through partnership between Welsh Government, where possible partnership with UK Government, with the European Union as well. Let's not forget how many companies and how many people have been upskilled by our membership of the European Union. Also partnership with local authorities, partnership with higher education and further education to make sure that skills are aligned with what employers need. But also partnership with businesses. And I do think that the manifesto that you've produced is very similar in the mood music to the recent document prepared by the Wales TUC. You talk very much about the need for economies of place, and that's something that I'd very much welcome. TUC talks about better jobs closer to home. I think what's clear is that we shouldn't have to move out of our communities in order to move up in the world, and that means that there should be quality job opportunities in every community. That means that there should be an opportunity to exploit our own innovation and creativity to start up businesses. I do hope that there's now universal recognition that we should not go back to re-establishing a type of WDA that seeks out here today, gone tomorrow investors whose roots in Wales are so shallow that the company would be blown apart by the mildest of economic winds. And instead that we do utilise our very limited funds, and let's face it, they are incredibly limited now, and we've got the CSR coming up, and I'm in no doubt that the sort of warnings coming from Westminster will leave us under even more pressure. But it's essential that we do use our limited resources to create the best possible ecosystem within the economy. that means that we use our money not just to attract quality investors who will plant roots as deep as possible in Wales. It means helping companies start up and grow. And I think it's entirely right that we do have funds such as the Accelerated Growth Fund to make sure that once a company has started up, Mark talks about the 99%, absolutely right, but I'm pretty sure that the 99% of businesses actually want to grow and be larger than SMEs. So we need to make sure that we do channel our funding and our energies in the direction of further growth and job creation. But it's not just about funding. It's also about making sure that we have the right education and skill systems, as I say, ensuring that we have a skill system that is aligned perfectly with the economic needs of modern Wales. And if we look at some of the best performing areas of Europe, we'll find that regional delivery has been extremely successful in that regard. And I think if we look at North Wales again, actually, the Regional Skills Partnership there is producing excellent results and ensuring that that economy in Wales is growing incredibly fast. So I welcome this evening's opportunity to discuss the manifesto. It contains a number of excellent ideas, one of which was in the UK Labour Party's manifesto at the general election, it has to be said, and another which I, like the other panellists, am extremely keen on concerning public transport.
Well, I think we've heard a very interesting response from all our panellists here. Now, I think we've got a limited time to ask questions. I'm keen to take as many questions from the audience as we can, so if you have a question you'd like to ask, please raise your hand. I would ask our panellists if they would kind of to give brief responses to the questions that are raised. Who'd like to ask a question? If I can, the gentleman in the with the blue shirt in the corner of the glasses. I think it's Dr. Mark Lang. There we are.
Shall I just speak out?
Yeah.
Mark Lang, it seems to me one of the most important ways that we can achieve sustainable local economies is to procure goods and services more in Wales to small Welsh businesses. I'd like to know what each of the panel members thinks is their number one issue that prevents greater public sector procurement of goods and services to Welsh businesses.
Okay, I think we'll start with Eluned Parrott on this one, if I may.
Thank you. I wish I had more than one. But let me just say that I think that probably the biggest challenge is risk aversion in local authorities and public buyers, which makes them tend towards bundling up packages into being as cheap as possible, as opposed to giving as much value as possible. And when we talk about added value, instead of talking about how we can enable good relationships with local suppliers and that kind of partnership, instead what we're doing is we're adding things like apprenticeships, again, which tend to presuppose that it's going to be a very big supplier that's going to take forward a contract.
I said keep it brief, so we'll have Mark Reckle now briefly to give his response.
Well, you may not be surprised, but the one I would identify is the European Union Public Procurement Directive. I simply believe that we can much better procure things with a more flexible approach rather than as soon as you go across a binary limit than having to go through the scope and bureaucracy of the process that is required. I've been working with one local business that's coming up with really impressive proposals to greatly cut the cost of street lighting for many, many councils, but is simply unable to bundle the capital financing with that in an arrangement that save enormous amounts of money because the Public Procurement Directive and those EU rules prevent that from happening. I simply think we would benefit from far, far greater flexibility.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let me put that question to Rhun up Iorwerth.
There's much, of course, that we can do within current regulations, and if I had to choose one thing, it would be capacity, and the realisation that we need capacity within procurement in Wales in order to bring about the kind of transformational change that seriously increasing procurement that stays in the Welsh economy could achieve. In order to reach that, we've said that we'd be willing to legislate. Government has been saying a lot of good things on procurement, but it's been unable to pass on a message of the power of the Welsh pound to other public procurement bodies in Wales. We think legislation would be a way to make sure that that does happen. This costs nothing. This is £2.5 billion that is washing around in the Welsh economy that could be used better, costing nothing, but we need the capacity in order to do properly.
Thank you, Rhun. I think that since you mentioned the Welsh Government there, it's only fair that I go to Ken there and ask for your response, Ken.
Thank you, Rhodri. Yeah, it's worth noting, of course, in the last 9 years, the number of companies that have successfully procured from the public sector has increased by 20%, so we're heading in the right direction in many respects. We're leading the way in Europe, but I think a lack of collaboration to address the capacity issue is probably the biggest barrier. But there are also opportunities with procurement, and I was interested recently to meet with people who have been feeding into our manifesto process, and they were saying that in the United States there's a keenness to use procurement systems to address inequality. So in many respects, they can build into procurement requirements to improve access to jobs for women and for veterans as well.
And finally, if I come to you, Mark, and to give your response to that question.
Yes, a concern repeatedly raised with me by small businesses in North Wales is the upfront cost, upfront investment resources that's often, in their words, quote, entirely abortive and unproductive, particularly in the pre-qualification processes, the simplification, standardisation, and procurers, the public sector bodies actually procuring the procurement teams to assess what the cost is going to be of this to those tendering, and perhaps considering a maximum realistic ceiling on that. That's certainly what the SMEs have been speaking to me of emphasising, added to which is concern that too often tenders that are won on price are then found to be lacking in essential resources and did not represent the best value in the first place.
Thank you, Mark. Right, we've got time for 2 more questions, probably, so let's make them good ones. If I can go to a fair one of our members from Swansea in the audience.
Transport, you've all mentioned your response to the transport agenda as described here. Nobody, not one member of the panel, mentioned air travel. Nobody mentioned the elephant in the room, that is Cardiff Airport. I had the pleasure recently of going to Boston. The flight from Heathrow to Boston takes 6 hours. The travel from Swansea to Heathrow took 6.5 hours. Our face on the world currently is 6 hours from Swansea at London Heathrow. What do the panel suggest we do about this, please?
Ken, can I come to you first on this point? I think
first of all, it justifies why we were right to save the airport. Losing the airport in the first instance wouldn't have put us in a position to capture more routes, which is what our priority is. And in order to capture more routes, you have to make the airport more desirable as a destination for travellers, and then you have to go out and make sure that you appeal to as many carriers as possible. I'd also say that in terms of transport, it's absolutely crucial that we get electrification of both the South Wales line and the North Wales line as well. It's absolutely critical that we don't just rely on roads, that we also have proper modern 21st century rail systems.
Thank you, Ken. Perhaps I'll come to you then, Mark, because obviously your party has had some things to say about the airport in the past.
Yes, probably where my colleagues had concerns about the nationalisation of Cardiff Airport, and I think the bill so far ticking is 80 million. Of course, we want it to be a success. It's got to be a success, but then we want to return it to the business sector, the private sector, and invest the proceeds in transport, meeting transport need in all corners of Wales. In my corner of Wales, that could be going towards a third Menai crossing, further widening on the A55, and then looking in partnership with UK government and other bodies on the rail agenda that in North Wales, a particular core we heard reference for electrification, thanks to the work of the North Wales Economic Ambition Board, who brought together a coalition supported by the then Secretary of State to drive that agenda forward. Thinking of North Wales, Airlink from Valley, which is entirely dependent on successive Welsh Government subsidy. Years ago, I attended a North Wales Economic Forum meeting where there was a presentation by academics from Bangor University who had been commissioned to look at the sustainability of the then proposal to introduce a link. And they put forward a proposal whereby it could become sustainable, but only with an effective business plan predicated upon extending links, firstly to Dublin, and then across main UK hubs, and then into mainland Europe. Unfortunately, a political decision was to, I think, cut the first square of turf some months before an assembly election, rather than ensuring a properly sustainable plan was in place to enable this to survive and prosper without subsidy into the future.
Thank you, Mark, for that point. That's great. I think as it's touched on Rhun's constituency, it's probably appropriate to bring him here.
The Conservatives like to play down Valley Airport. I won't go there other than to say that in the spirit of the need to grow local economies, strong links to Cardiff and, of course, to London and elsewhere is vital for economies like Anglesey. Back to the question, though. I was supportive of the principle of the government buying Cardiff Airport. I think the airport was in real danger of going down the pan had that not happened. I think the key thing is transport links. I pity that 6.5-hour journey from Swansea to Heathrow, I must say, but I can believe that it can take that long. We need to make sure that that people, wherever they are connected to international hubs elsewhere. That means making sure that there's investment in rail in the north of Wales, because Liverpool and Manchester airports are the airports of choice there. It means ensuring that Cardiff Airport is properly linked, but also we need to remember that Heathrow is vitally important to the Welsh economy anyway, and I've had very interesting conversations with Stuart Cole here about his HS4 or 5, is it, that would 3, okay, that's soon in the process, that would perhaps, you know, allow a 60-minute train journey from South Wales to Heathrow. That's way in the future, but that's where we need to be aiming and realising how important the connectivity is if Wales is to take its place in the world and grow as an economy within a family of nations worldwide.
Thank you, Rhun. I think I'll turn to the other Mark now, if I make Mark Reckle, and to give your opinion on this one.
Yes, I was caught up in some delays coming back from Swansea last night, but it wasn't as long as 6 hours. But I did hold a debate in Parliament at the beginning of this year on the governance of Network Rail and concerns about electrification. And frankly, there was a board, about 100 people set up to run Network Rail, basically to keep the debt off the government's books to fall in with European rules. Those European rules changed such that it was put onto the government books anyhow, yet the UK government continued running national Network Rail on the same basis, and it really was becoming so inefficient, and the governance structures are awful. I was told in January, February they're absolutely fine by the rail minister, yet in May, June they admit it's a complete disaster, and they're now changing it. I think there's some good news in terms of Western Rail access to Heathrow. I think that, along with the completion of electrification when it does finally happen on the South Wales line, will materially improve access to Heathrow. But as other panellists have said, I think those links into Manchester, into John Lennon, but also into Birmingham Airport are equally important. And just think what could be done with that 50 or now £80 million if it had been put into other transport links rather than nationalising that airport.
Thank you, Mark. And finally, I'll come to Lynn and Parrott, who has the airport almost in your back garden, isn't you? So,
Not quite in my back garden, no one's landed there yet, but I do live in the community of Rhun, so I'm very pleased to tell you that there are quicker ways to get to America through Cardiff Airport via the Schiphol route with KLM, and also via Aer Lingus as well, so do use them, please. My community and the small businesses around it could do with that. But can I say that the question you asked about air connectivity was actually about surface transport to the airport, 6.5 hours from Swansea to Heathrow, and probably 3 hours on Fabian Way, I imagine. It is not good enough at the moment. We need to think about how we can improve that. Clearly, electrification of the Great Western Main Line is a step in the right direction, as is the Heathrow spur going in the direction of South Wales as well. I think when we look to Mid Wales, clearly they look towards Birmingham as their main route, potentially, as it is easier to get to and has more flights. So the increased frequency on the Cambrian line is helpful, but only if it then links into services from Shrewsbury into other places. Across the North Wales corridor, I absolutely support the electrification of the North Wales line there, and we also need to see some technical improvements to the way that trains flow from North Wales and into the north west of England too. But yes, indeed, in terms of the policy of nationalising the airport, I don't mind who runs it. I just mind that it works and it provides good value for money for the taxpayer. There's a question to be asked about whether or not the Welsh Government were seen coming by the current owner, given that Prestwick Airport was acquired for £1 by the Scottish Government, but I want to see it work.
Thank you, Eluned. Well, let's try and take another question for our audience. Has anyone got a good question? There's a gentleman right at the back there with the glasses. If you could... oh, yes, it's Ian Ellis. I can see him down past the pillar.
Hi, Ian Nellis. I'm the chair of the Gwynedd branch of FSB. We've talked a lot tonight about sort of improving our economy, but we're a very competitive world, and we've got a very big competitor just to the east of us. Now, we all know we can beat them at rugby, so what steps would the panel take over the next 5 years to put our economy in a place where it can beat our competitors?
I think we'll start with Rhun on this one, if I might.
It's about making Wales the best place to do business and creating the best business environment for businesses to be able to thrive. And it's not down to one factor or two, it's probably down to half a dozen factors. Skills has got to be up there. We've got to make sure that we produce 16, 17, 18-year-olds and onwards who employers want to employ and want to employ in Wales. We've got to make sure that our infrastructure is right. We've talked about transport. We need to talk about investing in not just super fast broadband, but ultra fast broadband. Some good messages coming out of Wales at the moment about the ambition of being one of the most leading regions, nations when it comes to super fast. I doubt if we're quite at that level, but we need to be thinking ahead to the next level and ensuring that, okay, Cardiff will grow. We want to see Cardiff generating growth. But unless we can attract businesses to Gwynedd, to rural Wales, and make sure that the economy can grow in those parts of Wales, the Welsh economy as a whole isn't going to grow. So I'd say skills and infrastructure, but in general creating the right business environment too, and that's where regulation perhaps comes into it, and ensuring that people want to do business in Wales.
Thank you, Rhun. If I can move perhaps to Reckle now to give his view on this one.
I'd say first that individuals and companies compete much more than countries compete. And I think one thing I didn't agree with in the What Wales Could Be report is abandoning a target of at least seeking to close the gap in GVA between Wales and England. And I think a very important part of it is transport links. And that North Wales economy is so linked in with Greater Manchester and other English cities. I think improving those links and interchanges is very important, as we're seeking to do in South Wales. And I do believe that the electrification and just shaving 15-20 minutes off travel from Cardiff or Newport to London, I just think that is something that should spread prosperity and make it more attractive for business, not just to base itself in the Greater Cardiff and Newport areas, but also for businesses to link and grow through interchange with each other. And I just make a final point about transport. I think as well as the time connections, what also matters is the cost. I think someone earlier said there's a risk of sort of sucking the life out of the valleys by, if I understood correctly, improving transport connections. And I don't think that's the case. And I think if you can have electrification to cut journey times, but also if you keep an eye on fares, which I think are part of the incentives for people, at least as much as tax credits, in terms of coming to work, and to spread that prosperity that I think we're beginning to see in the Cardiff area up into the valleys through improving that transport system, as well as the east-west things, I think are absolutely crucial.
Linda Parrott, if I can ask you to weigh in on this one.
Of course. I must be an eternal optimist. I'm a Welsh Liberal Democrat and I'm a West Brom fan. Life is difficult and challenging, but when we look at challenges, we must also look at opportunities. And the truth is that whilst England is a huge competitor, they're also a huge market, and they're right on our doorsteps. They are literally a footstep away from some of our businesses, and we need to make sure that we are working to address that market. London is one of the biggest mega cities on the planet and one of the richest too. It is a wonderful opportunity for Welsh businesses of all sizes, and we mustn't be parochial. There is a tendency in Wales for us to put up our fences, to stand at the edge and look inwards. We've got to stop doing that. We have markets all around us. We also have a sea all around us, which provides us opportunities for shipping our goods away, which we don't make the most of. We don't make the most of the opportunities we have there from energy as well. There are lots of opportunities there that we could potentially look to if we just turned around and started looking in the other direction.
Okay, and Mark Isherwood, briefly, if I could ask you to give your answer to that.
Yes, I think you touched on the very point about England, and equally along the coast, whether in North Wales, it's Manchester, Liverpool, Midlands, recognising the work that things like the Merseyside Alliance are doing and embracing them rather than attacking them and accusing them of trying to colonise Wales, which is, of course, nonsensical. It's about growing the affluence and well-being of everybody through proper sharing without threatening national identity. Transport's been touched upon. Brand Wales, the WDA was a very strong brand. It is strongly felt, I think, having a government department has thrown that away. Now, how do we rebrand Wales? Not only a great place to live, as you know, but it's a great place to do business to people outside,
Mark,
or even people considering starting businesses here. Access to finance. We believe that we should set up a series of regional banks working with existing banks to bring finance closer to businesses. So it's back to a concept where you can actually speak directly with or engage directly with the people who will understand your business in your locality.
Mark, thank you very much for your answer there. I'm going to have to wrap because we are very tight for time. So if I can turn to you quickly, Ken.
Yes, thanks, Rhodri. Ian, you're absolutely right. We are good at rugby. It was fantastic to see Wales beat England on September 26th. I hope every single one of us on the panel was cheering that occasion. Two things are utterly crucial to building the economy, skills and infrastructure. For Gwynedd, the two economic sectors that are performing astonishingly well are tourism and environment and energy. For tourism, that means that you have, in terms of infrastructure, you have, quite frankly, the right attractions, and that you build the infrastructure to get people to those attractions. And in terms of skills, it's about making sure the hospitality industry is as best as it can possibly be, and that young people in particular have got the skills to be able to meet the expectations of visitors. Superfast broadband is critically important as well, and for that reason it was my choice to make Gwynedd the pathfinder area for Wales in terms of business exploitation of superfast. We're already at the point of having connected 73% of business and domestic premises across Wales with superfast, and it will, by the end of next year, lead us to become the most digitally connected country in Europe. That's something that is to be welcomed. That is something which will give us an additional USP and will also enable us to capture more of the market from England, I think, in terms of tourism, but other elements of the economy.
Okay.
And get rid of the 7 tolls.
Right. I think we've got time for one more question, but it has to be incredibly brief. So I'm going to ask the panel to answer in one line, if I might, to this one. It's a bit of a challenge, but we'll give it a go. The lady there has got her hand up. I'll to ask a question for some time.
Okay, my name's Helen. I've got my own company here. I'm very aware of the fact that women face additional barriers when trying to set up their own businesses. Part of the model that you're looking at from America has women's business centres. Is this something that the panel thinks we should have here, or do they think we should have different support programmes specifically targeted at supporting women into business so we can use this underutilised resource that we currently have?
Thank you. It's a very good question, but I am going to ask you to give a brief response to it. I will start this in. If I ask you, Ken, if you can give me a very brief response to that.
I like the model in America, but I think childcare is the single biggest factor that's preventing women from accessing work.
I'll move straight to Mark, Reckless, to give his opinion on that one.
I agree. I think deregulating the supply of childcare, not requiring an inspection for anyone to look after someone else's kid, I think that would be the single best way of helping more women to work.
As moved on the panel, Eluned, if you would give your opinion.
Why not? I think that there's an assumption that we should all jump over the same level bar, but there's no recognition that we're jumping from different ground levels.
And Mark.
Thank you. As a father of 4 daughters, I know that they have faced barriers in the workplace and pushed against them. So I'm very keen to see the establishment of structures to support people like them and others who face the same situation in the future. What those structures will be open to discussion. Obviously, we've got organisations like Quarry Teg, we've got schemes to develop leadership skills amongst women. We need to be taking these forward.
And finally, Rhun.
I think role models are crucial, but be it through women's business centres of the type that you advocate or through other models, what's key is that there is a clear connect between those role models or potential role models and the people that they want to influence in order to be able to pass on good practice and give people something to aim for and try to emulate.
Thank you, Rhun. Well, I think we've had an excellent panel discussion tonight. However, time has caught up with us, I'm afraid, so I have to draw this evening to a close now. All that remains for me is to thank each and every one of you for taking the time often out of your own businesses to attend here tonight. We're very grateful for you all coming, and I think you've helped to make tonight a great success for us here at FSB Wales. So I'd like to say diolch I pawb am dod a cymryd rhan heno. And also a big thanks to our panel for taking part tonight. We're very grateful for each and every one of you turning up, and perhaps if we could just thank them once again in the usual manner. I think it's fair to say you haven't heard the last of us, and we will be discussing the manifesto with you in the future as we come up to next May. But thank you very much, and until then, may I wish you all a good journey home tonight. Many thanks. Goodbye.